Thank you for joining us for this webinar this afternoon. We'll give just maybe a minute or two for people to kind of join last minute, but this is our What is Digital Accessibility webinar, and my name is Matt Hackert. So like I said, I'll give just a moment for people to continue to join, and then we'll go ahead and get started. All right, we'll go ahead and get started then. Once again, welcome. Thank you for joining us this afternoon. My name is Matt Hackert. I'm with the Department of Disabilities for the state of Maryland. And this is our webinar with the topic, what is digital accessibility? This is part of the IT Access Initiative with the Department of Disabilities, with myself and Stephen Polacek, who is kind of helping behind the scenes run things. Also, quick thanks to our closed captioning. Chelsea is our captioner today. Just as a note, this session, as with most of our sessions, is being recorded and will be posted to the MDTAP YouTube channel probably in a day or two. So with that, we'll go ahead and get started answering the question, what is accessibility? What is digital accessibility? We'll start off with just a couple of definitions to kind of get the ball rolling. And incidentally, we will try and do some Q&A. If folks have questions that come up in your mind, you can feel free to post them in the chat, but we will do all of the Q&A kind of at the end of the presentation, and we'll get to as many questions as we can. So from Merriam-Webster, their definition of accessible is capable of being reached, easy to speak or deal with, capable of being used or seen, capable of being understood or appreciated, capable of being influenced, easily used or accessed by people with disabilities or adapted for use by people with disabilities. And while all of those are important, those last two are kind of at the crux of what we're talking about. From the World Wide Web Consortium, web accessibility means that websites, tools, and technologies are designed and developed so people with disabilities can use them. And that is really our big focus with accessibility. So people with various types of disabilities can still access and use and get the same benefits out of digital technology, whether those are websites, software, mobile apps, and we'll kind of cover those here in just a moment. But with the same ease of use as anyone else, without any kind of limitation. So we'll talk about some of the kinds of disabilities. And while there may be kind of an intuitive order to this list or ranking, I'd be hesitant to say outright that any one of these is more challenging than any of the others listed. But certainly there are some that do require more focus and attention. The first type of disability noted on the slide here is visual. Accessing technology, accessing computers, as most of you are probably aware in how you typically work with technology day to day. It's visually looking at a screen. Elements are laid out for you in a two-dimensional way. You can typically, in most cases, jump to certain parts of the screen of interest. You can kind of get a quick at a glance view of what's being presented and focus your attention on specific areas of importance. But other disabilities include auditory deficiency. And so this can have an impact on audio and video content, video that has audio. Obviously, spoken word or sounds would be either difficult or impossible to hear. Other disabilities that are addressed include cognitive. So it's important to think about your writing style and how understandable terminology is, how much background do you have to understand content. Then there's physical disabilities, and these affect primarily how people interact with their technology. While most often people use a mouse or other tracking device to point and click on things, and then sometimes use a keyboard to type text input. For people with certain physical disabilities, that's not always possible. And so there are, again, adaptations that they put in place to mitigate those kinds of challenges. Neurological can encompass a broad range of things. One in particular example that you might think of might be epilepsy and being susceptible to seizures. So certain kinds of video content, certain animations, content that includes patterns of flashing or certain colors of light can trigger episodes and can cause serious health problems for certain subsets of people. And then speech. Well, for a long time, we couldn't speak to our computers. That's becoming more and more another means of interacting. But people with speech disabilities can be affected by that. Talking about examples of the kinds of technology that we're addressing and that accessibility is an issue for. We talk about websites and their content. That's probably foremost and most obvious to everyone, because we always talk about website accessibility and remediation and fixing accessibility issues on websites. And certainly that's one of the most common ways that people interact digitally. And so if the means by which people work with their technology can't work with a website as it's designed, either the website has to be modified, and sometimes that can be done kind of in real time as the web browser and access technology processes it. But if a website is coded in such a way to bypass those adaptations, or those adaptations don't work, and with a number of accessibility issues, when they aren't things that a machine can decide or make a good judgment on, then content and website interfaces become no longer accessible for people with disabilities, depending on the type of disability. Electronic documents. Again, first and foremost, we probably think of PDF files, but the way a document is formatted, whether it's a text document or a spreadsheet or a PowerPoint presentation, digital documents, there are certain aspects and considerations to keep in mind to make them as broadly accessible and inclusive as possible. Mobile phones and apps. Today, the broadest market share includes Android and Apple manufactured phones. Those are kind of the two obviously most popular platforms. Those phones include quite a few access technology features that address some of the major categories of disabilities we've talked about. They include screen reading features. They include zoom and magnification features, features for people with hearing loss. But again, it's also important to make sure that apps that run on mobile devices are compatible with those tools. Software, which is kind of just a broader category. It includes mobile apps, but also addresses standalone software that runs locally on your computer. So think of Microsoft Office as an example, but it can also be software that you run through a web browser. So the only part of it that your computer is running is just the interface that loads on a web page. That interface and the information and content provided through that application and the way that somebody can manipulate and work with that application has to also work with the different strategies people use to mitigate various disabilities. Video and audio content. We talked a little bit about this in terms of people with hearing loss, but so captioning is an important component for video and audio content, so that you're not reliant solely on one sensory input to get information. Likewise, depending on what kind of action is taking place in the video, dialogue may not be sufficient for someone with vision loss to understand all of what's happening in a video. As a good example, sometimes you'll find on the web, you'll find videos with a music track and text messages that appear on screen talking about whatever the video is about, but no audio other than just the musical soundtrack. So someone who can't see or can't see well enough to read those text messages in the video are deprived then of that information. So it's important, again, not to rely solely on one sensory form for purveying information. And then the last technology category that we have listed is standalone systems. A good example of this, it would be hardware kiosks. So you might find at a government office a check-in system where there's an iPad or a tablet on the reception desk with an electronic form to fill out and sign in. There are accessibility considerations for how those tablets are designed and the check-in software works. So moving on, how does it help? It allows equal access to information and services for people with disabilities. It includes temporary disabilities. So think, for example, of a broken arm. If you're right-handed and your right arm is in a cast, it's very difficult to use a mouse, for example. So there's all kinds of temporary scenarios that may impede your ability, even if you don't have a chronic disability. So disabilities can affect quite a few people. Little statistic, the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention has stated as of yeah, I think this was as of 2022, and I'm not sure if I'm misremembering that, but they state that 26% of the US population has a disability of some sort. And so if you think of 26% is roughly 1 in every 4 people that you encounter have some kind of disability. So accessibility improves the user experience and agency for people, for being able to carry out transactions and read information fully and autonomously and independently, and provides alternatives in certain situations. For example, being able to watch a video on a device in a public place where headphones aren't available. You can have the video muted, but still gain all of the content of the video without disturbing those around you. Accessibility is required by law. The Department of Justice, DOJ cases, filings about discrimination related to accessibility are rising. Guidance issued is being issued on ADA compliance. ADA regulatory standards are coming. And we'll talk a little bit more here about some of those standards and what those are coming from. Just as a bit of a preview, the Department of Justice just this summer has put out has solicited public comments on proposed rulemaking, and that comment period has just recently ended, but they're seeking feedback on some changes and rules that they're making to specify what standards, what exceptions might be reasonable. So speaking about the laws and standards, we'll go ahead and go into a little bit more detail. First, primarily, as this pertains to the state of Maryland, we have the Non-Visual Access Clause, or the NVA, that we talk a lot about internally. So the Non-Visual Access Clause is contractual wording that gets put into procurement contracts for software and digital services that require that those products and services meet accessibility guidelines. Currently, the state's NVA clause references the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines version 2.0. But really, in most cases, we do encourage adapting to 2.1 level AA compliance. Again, we'll get into the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines in a moment to understand better what that means. But in addition to that, again, the proposed rulemaking from the Department of Justice is also talking about adopting that same level 2.1 AA as a federal standard for covered entities that need to comply to accessibility standards. So Section 508 of the Rehabilitation Act and the Americans with Disabilities Act, ADA, includes information and regulations about what entities are covered, and again, starting to talk about what level of standards, and really primarily what's important is the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. This is a whole list of guidelines that's published by the World Wide Web Consortium, or W3C, that has a list of kind of compliance requirements, and it talks about things like including alt text to describe, to provide a text-based description of graphical content, requiring captioning for videos, and a number of things that talk about keyboard access, so that a mouse, for example, isn't the sole means of inputting information. So it talks about being able to access controls with a keyboard as well as by other means. So NBA and Section 508 requires government entities to be compliant with a set of technical standards laid out in the laws. And again, so that's talking about those WCAG guidelines. IT procurements must also be compliant. Any vendor providing product or service to the government must meet the same standards. The NBA places enforcement capabilities in the hands of the Department of Information Technology, do it. And Section 508 places enforcement is handled by the U.S. Access Board. So that's at the federal level. ADA enforcement is handled by the Department of Justice. And again, at the moment, there's no set standard, but again, the proposed rulemaking that has been going on since August is looking at adopting WCAG version 2.1 level AA. This covers employment, state and local government services, and business and nonprofits. As of March 2023, March 8th, 2023, there are 97 cases listed on the disability. Oops. Sorry, I lost my place in my notes. Yeah, as of March 8th, 2023, there are 97 cases listed on the disability rights cases page. And there were 3,255 ADA lawsuits filed in 2022. So, this is really a concern for people, and the Department of Justice is taking it seriously. The Department of Education Office for Civil Rights presented at Accessing Higher Ground in 2022. So that's where some of these statistics are coming from. So let's talk about the WCAG, Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. So this is the actual set of standards talking about, how do we define what is accessible? Created by the World Wide Web Consortium, W3C, provides a testable set of standards to serve as a baseline. So just meeting the standards does not guarantee accessibility, but it does get us in the right direction. As kind of a humorous anecdote, I don't have all of the details about this, but I know that just to kind of illustrate a point, somebody in recent years was able to build a website that, when tested, it technically follows all of the accessibility guidelines in WCAG, and yet the website itself was inaccessible to screen reading and other adaptive access technologies. Obviously, this was done to illustrate a point that just checking off all the boxes and passing all of the tests won't guarantee accessibility. A more important standard to think about, we talk about all the time, is usability. When something can be technically accessible, it may not be as easily used by someone with a disability. So that's also important. And when we look at and do website evaluations, Stephen and I, of course, do that all the time for different state agencies. And a lot of the information that we include in our report are items of concern or suggestion that aren't violations to the letter of the law of WCAG. However, they're suggestions that we make that will significantly improve the ease of use of websites by people with disabilities. So going back to the WCAG, the versions are separated by publication date. So 2.0, 2.1, 2.2 was just recently almost published. That actually did get delayed. I don't think it has quite officially been published yet, but likely will be very soon. And then each of those publication versions has 3 levels of compliance. Level A is kind of the bare bones. The level A criteria are things that just, no exception, just have to be in place in order for something to be considered accessible to people with disabilities. Level AA is the compliance level that we really try to meet. That also addresses those minimum bare bones requirements, but also speaks to a lot of common usability issues. And then AAA, the highest level of conformance or compliance, has to do with things that can be done to significantly improve access and usability, and make for a more pleasant experience for people that rely on access technology. And I will add to that 100% compliance, while it's a goal, it's certainly something we always strive toward. It's not really something that can, practically speaking, be attained. So we, work to get as close to it as we can, knowing that there always might be additional tweaks and things that could be made to improve an experience. Another thing to keep in mind is that it's not a static thing. Websites are modified and updated all of the time, and anytime a change is made, either to the content or to the underlying infrastructure of a site, or even if changes are made in third-party tools like web browsers and screen access technology, any of those can impact the accessibility of a website. Some of those are under the control of the web developer. Some of them are not. Those that aren't are not as likely to impact things. More often, when we get complaints that are kind of in that category of being outside of the control of the developers, people accessing websites using older technologies. So Internet Explorer is a really good example. There are a number of blind people that are hesitant to upgrade their technology because they've had so many experiences in the past where doing so has broken accessibility or made the accessibility experience much worse. And so they're very reluctant to move beyond what they know and are familiar with. But as you're probably aware, IE is no longer supported by Microsoft. There's a lot of modern web technologies that aren't supported in Internet Explorer. And so even if you're not reliant on screen reading software, for example, you can still have a lot of trouble accessing modern web pages that employ a lot of those newer technologies. So that's an instance where somebody may have a poor experience accessibility wise. It's outside of the control of a web developer. It's not realistic to expect web developers to continue developing websites and web technologies that are still compatible with older legacy software like that. Likewise, it's important to keep screen readers and access technology up to date as well, to again make sure that the software that you're using to access the web is as compliant as it can be with web standards and everything else. Anyway, back to the laws that we're talking about. The NVA and Rehab Section 508 directly refer to the 2.0 single A and double A standards. There's no official movement on changing to 2.1 or 2.2 at this time. But as I've noted a couple times, proposed new rules from DOJ look like they will be adopting 2.1 AA as as the official level of standard for determining accessibility. So let's look at some concerns and culture around accessibility. So this sounds great. How do I do this? Education, section 508.gov has a lot of resources. The W3C Web Accessibility Initiative, WAI, has a lot of good resources for getting started learning about accessibility, kind of learning the basics. Both of those websites have a lot of free material for people to access. Then there are companies that are specifically remediation and accessibility service providers. So these are companies like DQ and Level Access that provide training courses and have options where they will provide trainings to groups of people, either virtual or in person. Contact advocacy organizations. So these would be organizations like the National Federation of the Blind, American Council of the Blind, and equivalents that specialize in other disabilities. I'm not as familiar with those that aren't blindness related, and my apologies there, and I don't mean to exclude other ones. But anyway, consumer advocacy groups are always very eager to share information that will help developers provide a better, richer, more accessible experience for them. So they're also a really great resource. So addressing concerns of resources, time and money. A lot of people have the perception that it's expensive to remediate or include accessibility. If it's included at the beginning, those cost add-ons are much smaller than adding them on at the end. However, it is required and expected by law. So it's good to have a plan in place, even if it's not implemented immediately, to make things accessible. Kind of an example situation too could be finding yourself in a situation where no one in an office has a disability, and therefore accessibility for a software package that's used in that office are not taken into consideration. But then a qualified candidate with a disability is hired, that then requires to go back and evaluate finding a different version of that software or ways to remediate that software, which again, actually in the long run gets more expensive. Find assistance, Maryland agencies can request help from the ITAI, which is the initiative that Stephen and I work under. We were always available to do group trainings, one-on-one trainings. We have a lot of archived material on our YouTube channel. So use us as a resource to help address accessibility concerns. So what if it's not a priority right now? Nobody with disabilities is using our product. one answer to that is that you're cutting yourself off from markets. Removes choice and business opportunities. Just as an idea to keep in mind, that Apple holds the lion's shares of the blind market. Apple was an early innovator in adding accessibility when they developed VoiceOver for the iPhone when it came out. And since then, Google has also made drastic accessibility improvements on the Android platform. Nevertheless, because it's been there longer for Apple, there's still a significant difference between the share of blind users using Apple products and those using Android products. This next slide talks about overlays and plugins. So typically what these are marketed as is a small snippet of code that can be added at the beginning of a website that adds a module that allows on-the-fly accessibility changes to be made. Oftentimes these include controls for changing font size, sometimes color contrast. Sometimes there are functions to enable a screen reader mode. However, we really recommend against these for a number of reasons. For one, it takes some of the responsibility of the coding and development away. It takes the ability to control that, and you're at the mercy of this company. And if they are to at some point go out of business or change business practices or change pricing, any of those things that are beyond your control, you're stuck back in the same situation. Either you pay the higher prices or deal with whatever other consequences, or you may end up back in the situation that you were to start with, where you have to develop your own accessibility remediations. So they're sold as quick solutions to becoming accessible. And again, as I said, we recommend that you not rely on them. There's legal precedent for the use of overlays, plugins not being compliant. And many people with disabilities report that overlays in the better situations don't improve accessibility, and in some situations actually make it harder to access websites when they're enabled. There's other problems with them, sometimes where it's difficult to tell what company is providing the overlay services. So someone with a disability who may enable an overlay and still encounters accessibility barriers has no one to turn to, because they can't determine who provides the overlay, and so they can't determine who they can provide their feedback on accessibility problems to. Many times the functions and features of these tools are handled by the tools that the users are already using, such as screen readers and magnification tools. So oftentimes, if you need larger fonts, for example, you may have already set up your browser and operating system to use larger fonts by default. So this being one of the features that overlays include is kind of redundant, because the user has already taken care of those changes on their end. Consider it as an alternative option that can be chosen to be used. So if they do add something of use, it can be one option, but again, it shouldn't be considered the sole option. All right. What I'd like to move on to is to show just a short demonstration of accessibility. The W3C has a website that they have designed where there's two versions of the same website. They visually look identical. One of them is accessible and one of them is inaccessible. Apologize for any background noise. So I'm going to take a moment and get that website pulled up and set up screen sharing and just give a little bit of a demonstration to see, to kind of show what some of those issues can look like.
Slower. Zoom webinar, meeting information button. Mute, audio, stop by video setting, closed, open, more options, question and answer button, open, more options for chat, share screen, Alt plus S button. Show all windows, button. Share sound, checkbox, not checked. Show all window, sharing options list box, use it, whiteboard, launch and share one screen, welcome to City Lights, inaccessible home page, Google Chrome. Show all windows, share sound, checkbox check, select sharing sound, optimize for share, welcome to City Lights, inaccessible. Screen sharing meeting controls. You have started screen share. Press F6 to switch between open Zoom windows. Share. Welcome to City Lights. Welcome to.
Okay, so I have the page up. Stephen, is the audio coming through from JAWS?
Yes, it is.
Perfect.
Participants can now.
All right. So this is a web page for a fictitious city called City Lights. It's a kind of a news and welcome center. So without going into too much detail about what the screen reader is giving us and talking too much about screen readers, we'll try and just focus on the web page itself. I will go through and just play some of the things on the page and kind of try and narrate and / annotate what's going on and some of the things that are inaccessible about it.
Blank. Heading level 1. Blank. Heading level 1 before and after demonstration.
Let me skip
Improving
down
list
to
of link overview. Blank. Current low blank. Home. List of 2 no place markers. Wrapping to top. Inaccessible home page. Heading level. Improving a list of 6 link overview. Current location. List end. Demo starts here.
Okay, here's where the demo begins.
Blank. Visited link graphic red dot with a white letter C that symbolizes a moon crescent as well as the sun. This logo is followed by a black banner that says City Lights, which is the name of this online portal. Finally, the slogan of the portal, your access to the city, follows an A. Turquoise green handwriting style and with a slight slant across the top banner.
So that is the City Lights logo. And already our first issue here has to do with alt text. Somebody was a little overzealous in describing the logo. And I'll show you in a moment their remediated accessible version of this website. But on that site, you'll notice that the description there is much more succinct. We'll keep moving down though.
To get missing image disk blank. Traffic construction work on main road today. Wednesday, 18 October 2023. Sunny, 23 degrees Celsius. Blank. Unlabeled graphic imp/nav home on mouse over.
So here's another common issue. You heard it say unlabeled graphic, and then something like image/nav/home, which is very meaningless to somebody browsing the page. So the screen reader is trying to guess at what the material is. And since there's not an alt text description provided, it's moving to the file name for the image and hoping that there might be something descriptive there, which turns out it rarely is.
Space. Vertical bar. Unlabeled graphic imp/nav facts on mouse over. Vertical bar. Unlabeled graphic imp/nav survey on mouse over. Vertical bar. Welcome to City Lights.
So there's several of those graphics that have no label. and or are picking up just file names that are either difficult to understand or just meaningless.
Blank. City Lights is the new portal for visitors and residents. Find out what's on, book tickets, and get the latest news. Link heatwave, link to temperatures. Link man gets 9 months in violin case. Link lack of brains hinders research. Blank. After 3 years of effort, city scientists now agree that the primary cause of the 2003 heatwave was hot air from our link news. Mayor, these kinds of crimes need more creative, effective punishments. For example, we could require compulsory link news.
So one thing that I want to skip to that I know is important is tables.
Range of
So
blank,
let me find
blank.
that portion here so that we still have some time for questions at the end.
Please see the file below. Blank. Bullet graphic killer bees. Link click here. Bullet graphic onions. Link click here.
Actually, this is a good thing to point out that there are several of these links that say click here.
Blank. Artichoke advice. Blank. Bullet graphic onions. Link click here.
If you're just using the tab key to move through the document, all you hear is click here several times, and there's no context, and so there's no way of knowing unless you find one of those links and then move around to see what text is surrounding it to understand what the context is and where that link might take you. Also, the bullets are showing up with as unlabeled graphics is another concern.
Artichoke advice telephone hotline 12 free penguins. Vertical bar free penguin slogan at zoo benefit cons link read more ...
Read more is another kind of link like that. If you're reading it out of context, you are left wondering, read more about what?
Vertical bar.
But there's a ticket page.
Copyright link. W3C link. MIT link.
Let me find it.
Webcon. Definition list of 9 items. Abstract heading level. Status of this document heading level 2.
Whoops, I'm on the wrong page. Sorry.
Welcome to City Lights. Inaccessible homepage. Wrapping to top. List of 6 items. Link overview. Blank. Current locate. Blank. Home. List of inaccessible. Blank. Inaccessible. Blank. Homepage. Blank. Link inaccessible. Blank. Link report. Accessible. Blank. Visited link accessible. Blank. Visited link homepage. Blank. Link accessible homepage. Blank. Link report. List and nesting. Link show. Link annotations. Blank. Link news. Link tickets.
Here we go.
List with 6 items. Tickets link. Welcome to City Lights. Heading level 1. Blank. Heading level 1 before and after demonstration. Improving a website. Use list of 6. List end. Demo starts here. Blank. Visited link graphic red dot get missed blank. Traffic and blank. Unlabeled graphic graph vertical bar. Unlabeled vertical bar. Unlabeled space. Vertical. City Lights in partnership with Globo Enterprises are proud to offer specially priced tickets to see these great artists Les Garsons and the Obelisks. Blank. These special deals are exclusive to City Lights and can only be purchased by calling the ticket hotline. Blank. Concert dates. Table with 2 columns and 2 rows. Les Garsons, column 1. The Obelisks, column 2. Row 2, 12/2/06, column 1. 24/3/06, column 2. Table end. Buy tickets by phoning the MUSIC line. Get your tickets now. Music line phone number graphic.
So here is the graphic with the phone number. However, the alt text only says music line phone number and the actual phone number is not provided.
Graphic. Adult FSRSDCST. Obelisks monkey $20.9 Les Garsons de la Plage $20.90 $27.90 $30.90 $33.90.
Likewise, it's not very clear.
Obelisks monkey $20.90 $20.90 $20.90.
Not clear what those different ticket prices are in reference to. So without going into more detail, I do want to kind of show you quickly the accessible version.
Welcome to City Lights. Accessible homepage. Blank. Navigation menu. Heading level 2. Blank. Today, Wednesday, 8. Traffic. Black explore site by topic. List end. Same page links. Same page list of 2 items. Demo starts here.
Okay,
list
so
of
here's
2
the
items.
accessible version.
Same page link. Skip to content within demo page.
So there's skip navigation links.
Same page link. Skip to navigation within demo page. List end. City Lights. Your access to the city. Graphic. Sunny spells graphic.
This is the same alt text for the logo, but it's much more concise.
Explore site by topic. Blank. Combo box collapsed. Quick menu go button.
There's this quick menu that did not even appear in the inaccessible version or wasn't apparent to the screen reader.
List with 16 items. Quick menu.
I can also open the menu.
Broadcast, education, electric, fire service.
And look at the different options available there.
Virtual PC
Close
tool.
out of that.
Explore site by topic. Combo box. Fire service. Virtual PC. Blank. Traffic. Blank. Today, Wednesday, 18 October. Blank. Heading level 2 navigation menu. List of 4 items. Home. Blank. Link news. Blank.
There's our navigation menu.
Link tickets.
Home.
Blank.
News.
Link survey.
Tickets. Survey.
Blank.
So
Link
let's go to
tickets.
the tickets page real quick on the
List with 4
accessible
items.
version.
Tickets link. City lights tickets. Navigation menu. Heading level 2. List of 4 items. List end. Heading level 1 City Lights ticket offers. Blank. City Lights in partnership with Globo Enterprises are proud to offer specially priced tickets to see these great artists. Legazel. Anti-obelisks. Blank. These special deals are exclusive to City Lights and can only be purchased by calling the ticket hotline. Table with 2 columns and 3 rows. Concert dates. Dates. You are on the table caption. You can use Alt date column 1, row. Event column 2. Row 2, date. 12 Feb 09, column 1. If. Legazel, column 2. Row 3, date. 24 Mar 09, column 1.
Notice as I move through the table now, the screen reader is reading the column heading on each column as we read across each row.
Event. The obelisks, column 2. Table end. B. Table buy tickets by phoning the music line. Get your tickets now. 1-269-68742/1269 Summary. Ticket prices for each concert are indicated by seat allocation. There are separate sets of ticket prices for concessions and groups of 5 or more.
So now you can see what the information is about the different ticket price tiers. You can listen to the phone number.
People. T. Adult table with 5 columns and 9 rows. Ticket prices for the adult column 1, row 1. Obelisks monkey $20.90, row 2. Adult rear seats $20.90, column adult dress circle $20.90, column 4. Adult special tables $20.90.
And again, now as I move across the row, it reads the column heading so you know what it's talking about. And if I move down,
Les Garson's the LaPlage $33.90, row 3.
It reads that now we're looking at tickets for the other band that's playing. Anyway, given the time that we're at, I will go ahead and conclude here with the demo. Stephen, if you want to put the contact slide up, and we can, if there are any questions, I haven't been watching the chat, but if you see any questions, Stephen, or if folks raise their hand and want to ask a question.
Doesn't look like there's currently any questions right now.
Okay. But if you're still thinking of questions, I will just conclude by sharing again how you can contact the Department of Disabilities. ITAI website is on the slide, mdtap.org. And our email is mdod.nva@maryland.gov. Our previous webinars, we have the link to our YouTube channel. So all of the content that we've presented in this format in the past are available on the YouTube channel. And again, we're available to do consultations for small groups of folks on pretty much any topic about PDF remediation, website remediation, checking websites for accessibility. We're happy to find different ways to educate folks in different agencies. Otherwise, I want to thank everyone again for attending this afternoon, and hope you enjoyed and hope you learned something new about accessibility. So I will leave it there. And again, if you do see any questions, Stephen, let me know. But otherwise, thanks for joining us.
I'm going to stop the recording now.